Hey, what's up everybody, Thunderbob here, and tonight we're going to be talking about Titan Quest 2, and I have put a ton of hours into this since early access started last week, more than I want to admit. I'm up to level 26 on my main character. I've pretty much gone through the main story that's available, most of the side quests and content, kind of explored most of the map, and I've got a pretty good sense of what this is all about, and wanted to share my thoughts. And overall, I think I really like this. It's still early access, still feels a bit rough at times, definitely needs more content, a little bit more polish, but there is a great basis here for a really fun action RPG. And reminder, this is early access, I'm not doing a full review because the game's not done. This is basically what I think of the existing content and what I hope is addressed through the early access phase. First, let's talk about what is available in early access. This is essentially one act worth of content, maybe 4 to 6 hours of the main quest, and then a little bit more if you're doing the side stuff, or if you play multiple character classes. And there are 4 masteries available that can be mixed and matched to create your class. You get some options to respawn enemies and bosses, and you can increase enemy levels, but otherwise there really isn't any post-game content here when you finish the act. So what here is pretty limited. With the launch discount, though, it's only $23, and I'm really buying this on the promise of what's to come, and with an understanding that they've indicated that this will be more expensive later. So this is $23 today. I could imagine this being maybe $40 by the time this game fully releases. And let's talk about the classes, which is perhaps my favorite aspect of the original game. When you start out, you pick one of 4 available masteries, which is Storm, Earth, Warfare, and Rogue. Storm and Earth are basically your caster. Storm based around lightning and cold. Earth is kind of like fire, related spells and abilities. And then Warfare is kind of a mix of ranged and melee combat, and Rogue seems to focus on mostly ranged combat. And you can mix and match these in any way to create your class, essentially. And I want to talk about my build and kind of use that to explain how the systems all work together. And so I picked Storm and Earth, which are the 2 kind of caster-based classes. And there's some overlap between some of these. Like if I look at some of these abilities, some of them are very similar. This Arcane Influx, it gives you mana regeneration and increased energy. If I go to Earth and I look in the same spot, there's one that does something very similar. And you'll see that a lot, like this bottom one here is spell damage and maximum energy, and I come over here and it's spell damage and cast speed. So like a lot of these feel very similar, like between the 2 caster classes. If you look at the other 2, there's some differentiation. But some of these abilities just feel a little bit close. Like I've got Storm Nimbus here, which is kind of like my buff. I click this and it's always on and it gives me more damage. And if I come over here, I've got Earth Enchantment, which kind of does the same thing. It's just fire and physical damage versus providing cold and lightning damage. There are some unique spells in each class, but there feels like a little bit more overlap than I was expecting, especially considering there's only so many active abilities, which is one of the negatives, I would say, is there's not a huge number of active abilities. And then some of the classes feel a little left out at the moment. Like there's no summon class, there's no pet class, there's no like shape-shifting kind of class. These are things that are kind of iconic to the genre. And the original Titan Quest had like a dozen masteries. So having only 4 here is definitely limiting, but they have indicated that more are coming. But I want to just kind of show you my build to show you how much customization is available. Because there are just a ton of things. There's attribute points, and basically you put a point into agility, knowledge, might, or vigor. And if I put points into knowledge, which is most beneficial for my character, it increases my resolve and cunning. And if I come over here, cunning is the stat that increases poison and lightning, and resolve is fire and cold. So this would buff all of the damage my 2 classes can do. If you buff Vigor, it gives you a small health boost, and it also improves all 3 of these. But it improves them less. Like, I think this one gives you 3 points, in Cunning and Resolve. This one gives you 2 in all of them, but then like 10 health on top of it. So right now I'm mostly going Knowledge. I was getting one-shot by certain enemies, so I started to bump Vigor a little bit more. And then we go to the Masteries. So every time you level up, you get a couple of attribute points. You get Divinity points, which are used to invest further into the tree and unlocks more skills going vertically here. And I've got both of these maxed out right now. And then you get 2 active points and 2 passive points. That's not per tree, that's total. So every time you level, you get some divinity points, some attribute points, 2 active points, and 2 passive points. And my build, I mostly had based around Lightning Bolt, which is kind of like Lightning Fury the way I have it spec'd. In fact, the ability here is even called Lightning Fury. So this is like a Lightning Bolt you shoot out, and then Lightning Fury will double the number of projectiles, and then I've got all these abilities that add projectiles, so 3 more, that gets doubled. I'm getting like 12 projectiles every time I throw this thing, and then a chance for lightning strikes to happen, which are basically just an extra lightning damage attack. This is definitely a lightning strike type build, and then this just buffs all of my cold and my lightning damage, and again, it's got a chance to generate lightning strikes randomly, anything in the aura that I've got enabled, and then increased lightning and cold damage. So that's just kind of like a buff that's always up, and it kind of reminds me of Lightning Shield from like Diablo 2, where it would be striking around you randomly. I've got Ice Nova, which is basically just like a Frost Nova analog, and I've got points into Flash Freeze, which will guarantee that all enemies get frozen whenever I cast this. And let me explain, when you level up a skill, it doesn't actually increase the damage of the skill. What it does is it allows you to pick more modifiers. So I could take these out and I could invest them elsewhere. And these are kind of like runes from Diablo 3. And it will change up how the spell works. So, I could decide to enable Electric Burst, which on first hit applies a debuff that will deal damage when it expires. Instead, I'm doing Lightning Strikes, which gives me a 30% chance to have a Lightning Strike on hit. And it really allows you to customize how you play. Every ability has a ton of modifiers, and you can install a bunch of these. So it's not just damage that you're getting as you level up your skills, but actually you're modifying how they work. So I've got Lightning Bolt, Ice Nova, Storm Nimbus, and then I'm using Cyclone, which is kind of like, reminds me of Hurricane. I'm doing a lot of Diablo 2 callbacks here. Hurricane from Diablo 2, the Druid spell, because I've got a point here that allows it to basically follow me as I run around the screen. So I've got this storm that's always following me around, and I've got it casting lightning strikes, again, that lightning strike. I've got Amplify, which basically builds up the longer I have it going. And for each Amplify, I get increased physical cold and lightning damage. So all these things are kind of feeding into each other in interesting ways. And I've got a teleport spell. And then you've got all these passive abilities. I've got things that are increasing my damage, increasing my energy, again, increasing lightning and cold damage. This will cause lightning strikes to occur 45% of all attacks, essentially. I've got increased damage with my overload abilities, and then increased damage for having overload. And my lightning bolt is causing overload. And there are just a huge number of like keyword abilities here, like an incredible number. Exhaust, overwhelm, overload, rage, flow. I'm not going to get into definitions for every one of these, but it seems like they want almost every skill to have different ways to interact with other skills. Like some of these, like here's overload. So I could have 2 overload abilities, and these would feed off of each other in interesting ways. And that's just between, a single tree. Other trees have other abilities. There just seems to be so many keyword abilities. It's almost overwhelming at times, but the way it all plays together is really interesting. So I really like that there's like a tech tree here, but it's not just like you're pumping it and doing more damage. You're actually modifying the skill and kind of customizing it to your specific play style. My only kind of complaint is there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 abilities, and it seems to be that across the board. That's way fewer than, from my memory, Titan Quest had. So right now there's fewer masteries available. There's fewer active abilities. It kind of limits you to some extent. I feel like there's not as much play space here as there was in Titan Quest 1, and I imagine by release there might be one or two more abilities here. There's probably going to be way more masteries available. So that's one area that I think needs a little bit of work is add a little bit more variety to the skills, differentiate them. There's a few that kind of cross over and are too similar to each other in addition to that. And then there's also, I didn't mention, there's a core skill tree here. And you have like core abilities that every class gets. You have a dodge move, which kind of feels a little Dark Soulish, where you get a few frames of invulnerability. And you can modify these the same way. There are things like that turn it into a teleport instead of a dodge. There's things that, give you increased speed, cause an explosion. Every class also gets a barrier. So you have a way to dodge and you have a way to mitigate some damage that's incoming. And then you have a healing potion and a mana potion that are both on cooldowns that regenerate as you deal damage. And then these are primary attacks. Like if you're not using any of your skills, you're just using normal attack, you can come in here and there's even ways to modify this. I haven't really played around too much with the primary attack, but it's interesting that that's available there. So there's just a lot of kind of unique ways to mitigate damage and to deal damage, and a lot of ways that it's kind of fun to play around with in Theorycraft. And I've definitely spent a lot of time just playing around in here. This is my current build. I'm not necessarily saying it's a great build, but I've been having a lot of fun with this setup here. I also want to take just a moment just to kind of show off the itemization in the system. And, there are kind of the traditional rarity levels, white, yellow, blue, and then it goes, I think it's white, blue, green, which I've only found like one green item odd, but it says infrequent, but it didn't seem more powerful than the yellows. Yellow, and then you've got purples, which are like epic level items, which seem to drop more from, they almost seem like unique. Like this dropped from a boss named Hippocampos. This dropped from Kiana. So these almost seem like unique type items, though I've anecdotally heard people say that there are uniques. I haven't seen any yet. So mostly I've been using rares, and there's a good number of affixes, good variety. You also have potions that have unique abilities on them. So you're equipping potions, though these are not single use. They just regenerate over time, but you can get some modifiers, extra health regeneration, cleansing certain things, extra energy regeneration, that sort of thing. So there's a pretty good variety of loot. There's no crafting in the system, unfortunately, yet. It sounds like that'll be coming later. I've seen some hints in the system that crafting is coming as well. There are some item slots like that. It seemed like I was not upgrading for very long periods of time. I would mention, like, I was using like level 5 item up to level 20 in a couple of these slots where I wasn't finding any replacements, and part of that is because you can see this X here. Every item has stat requirements. So I might find an item that requires might, and I'm not putting any points in might. So that just locks me out of all those weapons. Like you can see all these X's here. I need more might, I need more might, I need more might. So this vendor is more might based. There's 3 vendors in this primary town here. There's also a gambling merchant if you want to go gamble. And then this is like the mage, and you can see I can use all these because they're primarily like knowledge based items. So definitely it limits what you can use. I also look kind of ridiculous here. I've got like you can see my chest, but I like the shoulder items. They look like pieces of coral. So some of the items look cooler than others. But yeah, that's itemization. Obviously we're only in the first quarter of the game or something, so it's hard to judge this on, but there seems to be a good number of different affixes, and it's not as complicated as like Diablo 4 release, where they had like extra damage on Tuesday when you're dealing fire damage kind of stuff. It's much more spell damage, lightning damage, physical damage, resistance types, those sort of things. So overall, I'm enjoying the itemization and the hunt for items. Now let's talk about the actual moment-to-moment gameplay. This game really isn't doing anything new. In fact, it feels very much like the original game at times. It can be a bit slow-paced, with movement feeling a bit glacial at times. I'm sure you'll get faster as you collect more movement items, but I think the pace could be a bit faster. And I thought that about the original game actually 20 years ago. I could remember thinking the movement speed in particular was a little bit too slow. The combat feels pretty traditional for the genre, but there are a few twists. You get the health and mana potions that refill automatically over time. You also get that dodge that's kind of like a Dark Souls type dodge that gives you some invulnerability. And you get the barrier that can be used on a cooldown. And each of these can be modified by leveling them up, but it feels a bit odd because you have to, either put your points into skills or into these core abilities. The combat feels very dynamic with these tools, and many of the enemies have attacks that can kill you if you don't pay attention. Poison in particular was pretty painful, and I found that you really had to dodge out of the pools or you can die very, very quickly. There are also some bosses that just seem to have like one-hit mechanics. Even when I dumped quite a few points into the vitality stat, you really need to avoid these attacks or you are just going to die. That's just what it seems like they're going for. So it is kind of like Dark Souls, where you really need to be kind of thinking about what you're doing and avoid damage when possible. The what I'd consider the main boss for the first act, Pan, even though the game keeps going for a little bit after him, he feels like the most true act-ending boss. Was pretty difficult. I got to him a couple of levels low, I feel like, and he's got a couple of one-shot mechanics. And he's even got some kind of like bullet hell moments where he's just shooting out fireballs and you really have to kind of pixel perfect dodge to avoid them. Some interesting mechanics, nothing really new for the genre, but I thought it was kind of interesting, and you really had to use all of the tools available to overcome him. The leveling I mentioned, I think, was a bit of an issue overall. I felt like I was leveling a little bit slower than intended. Pretty much the entire time I was like 2 to 5 levels below what I was fighting, and I felt like I did all of the main and side stuff as I was moving. So it seems like the level ranges are a little bit awkward, or maybe you need to level up a little bit faster. Something felt a little bit off there. Because there is no level scaling. Everything is just a set level, so if you're too high, things are too easy. If you're too low, things are a bit hard. But overall, the skills all feel great. With the cheap respecs, I found several builds that I enjoyed before landing on the Lightning Fury setup I've got in this video. Combat feels good and weighty, and at least at this level, it's difficult enough that I needed to pay attention, but it wasn't really frustrating. The attack animations on your character and the enemies and the death animations are all well done, and overall the gameplay feels like a good foundation for what's to come, but it doesn't really do anything revolutionary either. Next, let's talk about the world, the story, the quests, that sort of thing. This game takes place in the real world, like the original, and involves some real historical and mythological characters and elements. And I really like this about the series, as so many of these games take place in like these completely fictional realms. And instead, this is just on Earth back in mythological times. And the story involves Nemesis, the goddess of Retribution, who is corrupting the threads of fate and causing chaos throughout Greece. And the player character must journey through ancient Greece and face all manner of mythological beasts to try and defeat her. The sequel really hits the feeling and the vibe of the original, which is kind of amazing considering this is a different developer, as the original developer went on to create Grim Dawn, which is kind of a spiritual successor to the original Titan Quest. Just wandering around the countryside feels like I'm transported back 20 years ago to the original game, which I bought on release and played on the first day and really, really enjoyed.
It's good to see.
There is no randomization to the world, but rather it's all handcrafted and fits together really perfectly. And really, it's the joy to explore this game world. Overall, the production values are quite high here, with high-quality cinematics, and all the NPCs are fully voice-acted. All the NPCs are also voice acted with just a ton of dialogue options. Like, you can go through and ask them questions, and there are certain quests that seemed like where you could just wander the countryside looking for the solution, or you could go and talk to all the NPCs in town and they would kind of direct you where you actually needed to go. It felt a bit like Diablo 2 at times, where you'd have like, if you want to just speed through all of the dialogue, you can and completely ignore it, or if you're interested in the lore, you can actually talk to them all and go through each of the dialogue options and really get a lot more out of the story. You know, it's hard to say from this limited slice where the story's going and if it's going to be good or not, but what I've played so far, I enjoyed, and I am kind of curious to see where this all goes and what Nemesis is like. And I want to touch on the graphics and the performance. The game looks really nice, and when you zoom in, the level of detail in the world is pretty astounding. It reminds me a bit of Diablo 4, which I think is one of the best looking games in the genre. I think the character models are a little plain, and you can't customize your character, but otherwise the enemies, the world, the environment are all top-notch. An area that does need improvement, though, is performance. I'm running this on a 3080, and you really need to adjust the settings to try to maintain 60 FPS, and even then there are some areas that just randomly would kill my performance. And there's also some pretty frequent frame drops and hitching. I also ran into maybe 2 or 3 random crashes that literally just locked up my whole computer. That hasn't happened in a long time, and I had to shut down and restart. And just a few other, not game-breaking, but just a few small bugs I've run into here or there. But overall, not too many bugs, but more just performance issues. For how good this looks, I don't think it should be running this poorly. And just kind of final thoughts. I've really enjoyed what is here, but what is here is pretty limited. There's only one act, and that act felt pretty limited, with only a few enemy types and really only one meaningful boss battle. There's only 4 masteries, and those felt unfinished with missing skills, and some of the skills overlapping between the masteries. So what is here I really enjoyed, but I would just like more of it. I guess, you know, that's maybe if the worst negative I have is that I want there to be more, they're doing something right. Because right now I've exhausted all the content, and I want to play more. I want to see Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, end game. So they've caught me. I'm definitely gonna be checking this out as more content is released, and especially at 1.0. Overall, I've enjoyed the maybe dozen hours I put into the game, but I think I'm done until there's more progress made. You know, it's a bit hard to recommend at the current price, but they've also stated that the price may increase later. So if you're at all interested in this, like if you're a fan of the original Titan Quest or action RPGs, or you know, you want to lock in that lower price, get it for $23 now instead of, who knows, $30, $40, $50 down the road. Or if you're interested in providing feedback during the early access period, I would suggest buying it. Otherwise, if you're kind of on the fence, if you're not big into this genre, if you didn't play Titan Quest 1, or you're not into more classic styled action RPGs, you might want to wait on this. But right now, what I've played, I've really enjoyed. So if you're a fan of the genre, of the original, you should check this out. I think you'd enjoy it. I'm going to end the video there. I do want to thank you for watching, and just have a good night, everybody.